The bell above the door chimed, a cheerful, innocuous sound that was immediately swallowed by a sudden, heavy silence. The midday chatter of the small cafe didn't just quiet down, it was murdered. Spoons stopped midway to mouths. Conversations died in throats. Every eye was drawn to the entrance, where the light from the street was blocked by 3 figures. 2 were mountains in sharp, dark suits, their faces impassive stone. But it was the man between them who held the room in a state of suspended animation. He was not as large, but his presence was an abyss, pulling all the air and warmth towards him. His suit was a whisper of gray silk, tailored so precisely it seemed a part of him. A dragon was tattooed in intricate, flowing lines up the side of his neck, its head disappearing into his perfectly styled black hair. This was Ryusei Tanaka, a name spoken only in hushed, fearful tones in worlds far removed from this worn-down American diner. His gaze swept the room once, a predator assessing a field. It was a look of bored, absolute power. And then it stopped. It froze. His entire body went rigid, a statue carved from disbelief. The bored dominance in his eyes shattered, replaced by a raw, gaping shock that was almost violent in its intensity. He was looking at the waitress clearing table 4. He was looking at Lena. Her back was to him, but he would know the line of her shoulders, the gentle curve of her neck, anywhere. He had traced it with his fingers in the dark, memorized it like a prayer. For 2 years, he had hunted for her, turned over continents, spent fortunes, all to find a ghost. And here she was, in a cheap cafe, wearing a faded red apron over a plain white shirt. She turned, a stack of dirty plates balanced carefully in her hands, and her eyes met his across the room. The plates didn't just slip. They exploded against the linoleum floor, a crash of porcelain and half-eaten food that was deafening in the crushing silence. Her hand flew to her mouth, her beautiful face pale with a terror he knew he had put there. But it wasn't just her face that held him captive. It was the impossible, undeniable swell of her belly beneath the apron. She was pregnant, heavily pregnant. The world tilted on its axis, the noise of the city outside fading to a distant hum. The man who could order death with a nod, who commanded an empire of shadows, felt his lungs seize. Every plan, every piece of cold vengeance he had nurtured in her absence, turned to ash. There was only one thought, a white-hot brand on his soul. Mine. Lena's heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, so loud, she was sure the whole silent room could hear it. 1 second, she was wiping down a sticky patch of ketchup. The next, she was staring into the eyes of the past she had bled to escape. Ryusei. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to be on this continent, in this city, in this tiny cafe where she earned $7 an hour plus tips. His world was one of penthouse views, of silent, deadly bargains made over expensive whiskey, of ancient codes written in blood. Her world was swollen ankles, the constant, dull ache in her lower back, and the perpetual fear of not making rent. She had built this small, fragile life for one reason, to protect the tiny one kicking beneath her heart. A life he could never know about. A life that would be forfeit if his enemies, or worse, his family, ever discovered it. His gaze dropped from her face to her stomach, and the air left her body in a painful rush. The secret she had guarded with every ounce of her being was laid bare under the harsh fluorescent lights of a Tuesday afternoon. She could feel the weight of every customer's stare, but they were nothing. The only thing that existed was the burning intensity of his eyes, a mixture of fury, betrayal, and a deep, soul-shattering wound she had inflicted. She had told herself she did it to save him. She had repeated the lie every night for months, a mantra against the loneliness. Seeing him now, seeing the raw pain on his face, she wondered if she had saved him or simply destroyed them both. His bodyguards moved with an unnerving, fluid grace, clearing a path. They didn't touch anyone, but people flinched away as if they had. Ryusei walked towards her, each step echoing the slow, deliberate beat of a funeral drum. He stopped just feet from her, close enough that she could smell the familiar, expensive scent of his cologne, a ghost of a life she no longer had any right to. "Lena," he said. Her name was not a question. It was a statement of fact, a claim of ownership. It was a shard of glass in his throat. He looked down at the shattered plates, then back to her, his dark eyes cataloging every detail, the exhaustion under her eyes, the slight tremble in her hands, the cheap fabric of her uniform stretched taut over the life she carried. "What is this?" he asked, his voice a low, controlled rumble that vibrated through the floor. It was a dangerous sound, the calm before a typhoon. She couldn't speak. Her throat was closed tight with fear. He took another step, his shadow falling over her. He was so close now. His gaze was fixed on her belly. "Tell me," he commanded, softer this time, but with an edge of steel that promised consequences. "Is the child mine?" The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It was the only question that mattered in the entire world. Denying it was the only sane, safe thing to do. But looking into his eyes, the lie withered and died on her tongue. The memory was so vivid it felt like yesterday. The scent of rain on the stone of the garden in his family's Tokyo estate. The suffocating weight of tradition in the air. She was standing before his father, the Oyabun, a man whose quiet words carried more power than a shogun's decree. Ryusei was in Osaka, handling clan business. He had been gone for a week. His father had used the opportunity. "You are a weakness," the old man had said, his eyes like chips of obsidian. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "My son is to be the future. He will lead the Tanaka-kai. His wife must be a fortress for him, not a vulnerability. You are a foreigner, an outsider. Our enemies see you, and they see a soft spot. A target." Lena had stood her ground, her chin high. "I love him. I would die for him." The old man had offered a thin, cruel smile. "That is precisely what you will do. Metaphorically, of course. You will die to him. You will disappear. You will break his heart so completely that he will encase it in ice and become the leader he was born to be. If you refuse," he paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Our rivals, the Sadogumi, have been making inquiries about his American wife. An unfortunate accident would be so easy to arrange. And then his grief would make him reckless. He would start a war we are not prepared for. He would lose everything. His life, his honor, his legacy. It wasn't a choice. It was a sentence." His father had slid a plane ticket and a thick envelope of cash across the polished table. "Leave. Tell him you never loved him. Tell him you were using him for his money. Be convincing. For his sake." And so she had. The phone call had been the hardest thing she had ever done. She had recited the cruel, rehearsed words, hearing his stunned silence, then his choked, disbelieving rage. She had hung up and shattered the phone, and a part of herself with it. 2 weeks later, in a lonely apartment in a city he would never think to look, she had discovered she was pregnant. Back in the cafe, the silence stretched, thin and fragile. Lena finally found her voice, a weak, trembling thing. "Ryusei, please." "Not here." Her plea was a whisper, but he heard it as if she had screamed. His eyes softened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of the man she had loved before the crown of the underworld had been placed upon his head. He gave a nearly imperceptible nod to his men. One of them approached the cafe owner, a nervous, balding man hiding behind the counter. A thick stack of $100 bills was placed on the counter. "The cafe is closed for the day," the bodyguard said, his voice flat and final. The owner just nodded, fumbling to flip the open sign to close. Customers, grateful for the excuse, scurried out, not daring to make eye contact with the men by the door. Within a minute, they were alone. Just the three of them, in a room that smelled of stale coffee and fear. Ryusei's attention was entirely on her. He had not moved. "Answer me, Lena." Her eyes welled with tears she refused to let fall. "Yes," she breathed, the word torn from the deepest part of her. "He is yours." The confession felt like a betrayal of the promise she had made to protect this child, but the lie was impossible to sustain under his gaze. The reaction was not what she expected. Not rage. Not a triumphant snarl. For a moment, His mask of command crumbled completely, and she saw a flicker of pure, unadulterated awe, quickly followed by a wave of pain so profound it stole her breath. The pain of a man who believed he had been abandoned by the love of his life, only to find out he had also been robbed of his child. What do you think is going through his mind right now? The rage of betrayal, or the fierce need to protect what's his? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Ryusui's hands clenched into tight fists at his sides, the knuckles white. He was a man of action, of swift, decisive violence and cold, calculated strategy. But this was a wound for which he had no defense. Why? The word was quiet, but it held the force of an explosion. Why would you run? Why would you take my son from me? He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a raw, wounded whisper. Did you hate me so much? Lena shook her head, a tear finally escaping and tracing a hot path down her cheek. No. Ryusui, you don't understand. Before she could explain, a portly man who had been too slow to leave his table grumbled as he squeezed past them towards the door. Excuse me, he said rudely, jostling Lena's shoulder. Some of us have places to be. Ryusui didn't even look at the man. His head didn't turn, but his eyes, when they lifted from Lena's face, became flat, black holes. A coldness emanated from him that was more terrifying than any physical threat. The man froze, a bead of sweat tracing its way down his temple. Get out, Ryusui said, his voice barely audible, yet it cracked like a whip in the silent room. The man scurried away, without another word. Ryusui's attention returned to Lena, his focus absolute. But the interruption had changed something. The raw emotion was gone, replaced by a chillingly familiar resolve. The protector had taken over. This ends now, he stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. You are not working another minute in this place. You are not living in whatever squalor you have hidden yourself in. You and my son will be safe. He pulled a sleek, black phone from his pocket, not his personal one, but a burner. He held it out to her. My private number. A car will be outside in 5 minutes. It will take you to a hotel. You will wait for my call. Do not run from me again, Lena. I will not be so understanding a second time. She wanted to refuse. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at her to run, to disappear again, to protect her son from the life that came with his father's name. But she was so tired. A deep, bone-weary exhaustion that had been her constant companion for months. The thought of a clean bed, of not having to stand for another 8 hours on aching feet, was a siren song. She took the phone, her fingers brushing his. The brief contact was like an electric shock, a jolt of memory of nights spent tangled in silk sheets, of a love that felt like the only real thing in a world of shadows. His expression remained hard, but his eyes followed the movement of her hand, a flicker of longing in their depths. As promised, a black, immaculate sedan with tinted windows pulled up to the curb 5 minutes later. One of his men opened the door for her. She hesitated, looking back at Ryusui. He stood unmoving, a sentinel in the wreckage of her small, quiet life. Ryusui, my things. My apartment, they will be collected, he said, dismissing her concerns with a wave of his hand. Nothing you have there matters anymore. Get in the car, Lena. It was an order, plain and simple. Defeated, she slid onto the soft leather of the back seat. As the car pulled away, she looked back through the window. He was still standing there, watching her go, a solitary figure who commanded the world but had just discovered the one thing he couldn't control, had been living a world away. He had men watching the hotel, of course. She knew they would be discreet, but ever-present. He had also had her apartment building put under surveillance. It was late that night when one of his men called him, his voice urgent. Tanaka-sama. We have a problem. 2 men, not local. They were watching the building. We identified them. They are Sadogumi. Ryusui's blood ran cold. His father's words from 2 years ago came rushing back. Our rivals, the Sadogumi, have been making inquiries. They hadn't stopped looking. They had been hunting for his weakness all this time. And now, she was back in his city, more vulnerable than ever. The danger wasn't a distant threat anymore. It was here. And they were hunting his son. The stress of the day, The shock of seeing Ryusei, the terror of discovery. It was all too much. That night, in the sterile luxury of the hotel suite he had provided, a sharp, cramping pain seized Lena's abdomen. It stole her breath and sent a wave of pure panic through her. It was too soon. It was weeks too soon. She doubled over, gasping, fumbling for the phone Ryusei had given her. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely dial. He answered on the first ring. Lena, his voice was tense, expectant. All she could manage was a choked sob and his name. Ryusei. The baby. I think it's coming. The line went silent for a single, terrifying second. Then his voice was back, transformed. The cold Yakuza boss was gone, replaced by a man hanging on by a thread. Where is the pain? How far apart? I'm on my way. Don't hang up. Stay on the phone with me. The journey to the hospital was a blur of agony for her, and a blur of controlled, terrifying speed for him. He didn't send a car, he came himself. He burst into the hotel room, his face a mask of fear, and swept her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing. He bypassed the emergency room, his men appearing out of nowhere to clear a path, their presence intimidating doctors and nurses into immediate, unquestioning action. They placed her in a private maternity suite, the best in the city. Ryusei never left her side. He held her hand, his thumbs stroking her knuckles, his touch surprisingly gentle. The man who wore a dragon on his skin, a symbol of his fearsome power, looked utterly lost. He watched the monitors, his jaw tight, his eyes filled with a terror she had never seen in him before. He was afraid. Not of rival gangs or bullets or betrayal. He was afraid of this. Of the raw, uncontrollable, fragile business of life. Hours bled into one another. Through the haze of pain, Lena was dimly aware of him murmuring to her in a low mix of English and Japanese, his voice a steady anchor in the storm. He wiped her brow with a cool cloth. He held her hand so tightly she thought her bones might crack, but she clung to his strength. In that room, they weren't the Yakuza heir and his runaway ex-wife. They were just a man and a woman, terrified and hopeful, on the brink of becoming parents. The world outside, with its dangers and its old wounds, ceased to exist. There was only the steady beep of the heart monitor, the encouraging words of the doctor, and the solid, unwavering presence of the man she had never stopped loving. And then, with a final, desperate push and a piercing cry that cut through the tension, their son was born. A tiny, perfect, beautiful baby boy. The doctor placed the crying infant on Lena's chest, and the world righted itself. All the pain, all the fear, melted away, replaced by a wave of love so overwhelming it felt like drowning. She looked up at Ryusei. Tears were streaming down his face unchecked. He made no move to wipe them away. He stared at the small bundle in her arms as if he were looking at the sun for the first time. "May I?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. She nodded, and he reached out with a trembling hand, his long, elegant fingers gently touching the baby's head, stroking the soft tuft of dark hair. In that moment, watching his hardened face crumble into pure, unadulterated love, Lena knew she had been wrong. Hiding their son from him wasn't protecting the child. It was robbing him of this fierce, unconditional, breathtaking love. "He's perfect," Ryusei whispered, his voice cracking. He looked from his son to her, his eyes full of 1,000 emotions. Regret, gratitude, a fierce, burning devotion. "Our son," he said, as if testing the words. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, a soft, reverent press of his lips. "What will we name him?" Lena looked down at the peaceful face of her baby. "Run," she whispered, "like the lotus flower. Something beautiful that grows out of the mud." Ryusei's eyes closed for a moment, absorbing the weight of her meaning. When he opened them, the last of his fear was gone, replaced by a cold, diamond-hard certainty. He held his son, his ruin, and he knew exactly what he had to do. He stepped out of the room and made a call. "Father, we need to talk." The conversation was short, brutal, and transformative. It was not a plea from a son, but a declaration from a successor. He exists, Ryusei said, his voice flat and cold. My son, and his mother is with me. They are under my protection. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, the crackle of an international call stretching across the void. Then, his father's voice, as dry and brittle as old paper. The woman was a mistake. The child is a complication. Erase them. It is the only way to secure your position. Ryusei almost laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. You misunderstand, he said, the steel in his voice dropping to sub-zero temperatures. This is not a negotiation. This is a statement of fact. They are my family.
You will welcome them as such.
You will publicly acknowledge my son as your grandson and heir. Or the Tanaka Kai will have a new problem. Me, it was the ultimate threat. To stand against his own clan, his own father. To declare war on his own blood. It was a choice between the empire he was born to inherit and the family he had just claimed. For Ryusei, it was no choice at all. He ended the call before his father could respond. He had drawn his line in the sand. He walked back into the hospital room, the weight of his decision settling on his shoulders, but his heart felt lighter than it had in years. He had found his purpose. It wasn't in leading an army of shadows. It was here, in this quiet room, with this exhausted, beautiful woman and their tiny, sleeping son. He arranged for them to be moved from the hospital to one of his private residences, a penthouse apartment with bulletproof glass and a security detail that rivaled a head of states. It was a gilded cage, but it was safe. The first night there, with Rin sleeping peacefully in a bassinet beside the bed, Ryusei finally asked the question that had been haunting him. Why, Lena? The real reason. I need to know. And so she told him. Everything. About his father's visit, the threats, the impossible choice she was given. She told him how she chose to shatter his heart to save his life. He listened without interruption, his face a mask of stone, but she could see a storm gathering in his eyes. When she finished, a profound silence filled the room. He didn't rage.
He didn't yell.
He simply reached for her, pulling her into his arms, and held her. He will answer for this, he vowed into her hair. For every tear you shed. For every day I lost with my son. He will pay, and Lena, feeling safe for the first time in nearly a year, finally allowed herself to believe him. The public reckoning came a week later. Ryusei convened an emergency meeting of the clan's top lieutenants and his father. They met in a traditional, minimalist room in the heart of his territory. His father sat at the head of the table, his face impassive. He expected his son to beg, to negotiate. He was wrong. The doors opened and Ryusei walked in. He was not alone. He was carrying Run in his arms, and Lena was walking beside him, her head held high. A collective gasp went through the room. To bring outsiders, a woman and a child, into a meeting of this magnitude was unheard of. It was a shocking breach of protocol. It was a revolution. Ryusei walked to the head of the table and placed his sleeping son, wrapped in a soft blue blanket, directly in front of his father. This, Ryusei announced, his voice ringing with authority, is Run Tanaka. My son. My heir. He then placed a protective hand on Lena's back. And this is Lena Tanaka. My wife. The mother of the next generation of this family. He looked directly at his father, his eyes burning with cold fire. They will be shown the respect they are owed. By all of you. There will be no debate. There will be no dissent. This is the new way. My way. If anyone in this room, including you, father, has a problem with that, you are welcome to leave. But you will not be part of our future. The challenge was laid bare. A public declaration of love and loyalty that defied 1,000 years of tradition. The old man stared at his son, then at the perfect, sleeping face of his grandson. He saw the same iron will in Ryusei's eyes that had defined his own youth. But he also saw something more. A strength not born of power, but of love. A strength he could not break. Slowly, deliberately, the Oyabun stood up. He looked at Lena, then at Ren. And for the first time he bowed. A small, stiff, but undeniable gesture of acceptance. The revolution was over. The weeks that followed were a blur of adjustment. The threat from the Sadogumi was handled with a quiet, ruthless efficiency that sent a clear message through the entire underworld. The Tanaka family was off-limits. Ryusui's father, humbled and sidelined, retreated into a quiet retirement, leaving the clan fully in his son's capable hands. But Ryusui's focus was not on his empire. It was on the small, brightly lit world he had built inside his home. He learned the specific weight of his son in his arms. He learned the sound of Lena's laughter, a sound he had thought he'd never hear again. He would come home from meetings where he had brokered deals worth millions or neutralized deadly threats, and he would spend hours just sitting on the floor, watching Lena sing to their baby. He discovered a softness in himself he never knew existed. The fear and yearning that had haunted him for 2 years were replaced by a profound, grounding peace. One evening, Lena woke up from a nap on the sofa. She saw Ryusui by the vast window overlooking the city lights. He wasn't looking at the view. He was holding Ren, rocking him gently, humming a Japanese lullaby his own mother used to sing to him. The fearsome dragon of the Yakuza was gone. In his place was a father, silhouetted against the skyline, protecting his entire world in his arms. He felt her watching him and turned, a small, genuine smile gracing his lips. "He has your eyes," he said softly. She walked over to him, leaning her head against his shoulder, her hand resting on his arm, right over the head of the dragon tattoo. "And he has your strength," she replied. Together, they looked down at their son, then out at the sprawling city below. It was still a dangerous world, but it no longer felt threatening. It was just a backdrop to their small, fiercely protected universe. They had found their way back to each other, not by erasing the past, but by building a new future on its foundations. A future built not on power or fear, but on the unbreakable bond of family. What does the future hold for Ryusui, Lena, and Baby Ren? If you want to find out, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next part of their story.